The principle behind the autogyro is a key safety feature on all true helicopters. As long as the rotor blades keep turning, a helicopter can glide safely to the ground, even if it loses power.
I think the general perception is that helicopters are a dangerous machine to operate and to be involved with. However, it's a very safe machine, and there's not really anything that causes us a problem that we can't get out of.
The trainee Navy pilot of this Gazelle helicopter is about to face every pilot's nightmare: total engine failure.
That's good. Engine is now shut down. We are committed.
When the engine fails, the most important thing that the pilot has to do is to lower the collective immediately. The blade speed, or the NR as we call it, will decay to a catastrophic level and we will not be able to recover it.
Established in auto rotation. It's looking well ahead.
The powerless rotor blades keep spinning, but the helicopter plummets at 30 feet per second.
Nose coming up and putting in an S-turn.
There's nothing we can do to stop the aircraft going down. However, we can manoeuvre the aircraft towards a suitable landing area, and we can control the speed.
Yes, we are going to make it. Watching the speed now.
From about 150 feet, we then start what we call a flare. Using the cyclic, we raise the nose of the aircraft, or the speed of the rotors increases, which we can then use to cushion with the collective, cushion onto the ground, and hopefully a nice gentle landing.
Holding straight. And there we go, lever fully down, controls are central.
The helicopter's ability to glide with no power is called auto-rotation. Like the autogyro, the air rushing through the rotor blades keeps them spinning, and this generates just enough lift to survive the rapid descent.
The best analogy is the sycamore seed principle. We've seen the sycamore seed dropped, it starts to rotate and glides down at a much slower rate than it would if it were just a normal seed.
But just as the seed has to be moving before it can start to rotate, auto-rotation can only start if the helicopter is moving. To be able to make a safe auto-rotation landing, this helicopter either needs to be at least 100 feet up or flying at a minimum of 30 knots. Pilots chillingly refer to these minimum heights and speeds as the dead man's curve. Fly below these limits, and an emergency landing becomes impossible. But when modern helicopters do crash, there is still a good chance of survival. In the 60s, engineers began intensive research into new technologies that might help passengers and pilots survive. They developed impact-absorbent body shells and crash-proof seats. And to reduce the risk of fire, they developed rubber fuel tanks designed to self-seal if they ruptured. Critical mechanical components on military aircraft were re-engineered to withstand direct hits from bullets. Manufacturers even experimented with ejection seats. Pilots couldn't be ejected through turning rotor blades, so explosive bolts were fired to release each blade. But the systems were expensive and unreliable, so the designs were never incorporated into production helicopters. Los Angeles, 1 a.m. While the city sleeps, the criminals do not. 70% of the city's crimes are committed at night. The police chopper is a vital weapon in the fight against crime. It's the eye in the sky, providing vital backup for the officers on the street.
We send out one-man police cars at night, knowing that the helicopter's above them, we can literally lower the helicopter down to within 50 feet. So the officer knows that he has a backup there no matter what the circumstances are.
To penetrate the darkness below them, the chopper uses a powerful spotlight. They call it the artificial sun. With light equivalent to 1 million domestic light bulbs, from 800 feet up, it can flood areas as large as a whole block.
The suspects fled northbound.
These choppers are also fitted with infrared systems. They detect heat, whether a human body, a running engine, or the family pet.
We can tell the officers if there's a vehicle leaving or if there's a person injured on the ground, if their house's windows are broken or the doors open, or if there are people fighting in the street. Does it appear to be dangerous? Does there appear to be somebody there with weapons? So as they approach the scene, we're answering questions that they're asking themselves.
35, 1022, 926. We found the owner.
But to fulfill his vital backup role, Ron Palmer must fly slow and low, right on the edge of the safety limits of his machine.
Most of the flying we do is right on the margin of the dead man's curve, and that's just the nature of our job.
Dangerously close to the limits, they provide air cover for the soldiers in the urban war below. They keep circling to make sure they have enough momentum for an emergency auto-rotation landing. They risk their lives, but the lives of the officers on the street are also at stake.
Probably the most important thing I say we do right now is we save as many police officers' lives as we can while we're in pursuits.
By day, the chopper is the fastest way to travel across the increasingly congested streets of major cities. More than 50 police choppers patrol the skies over the Los Angeles area.
Cessna 826 to traffic unit just by you to your left, 7 o'clock.
The megalopolis is approximately 13 to 15 million people living in a very small area. Congestion is probably our biggest problem here, driving on the streets. The helicopter flies line of sight. We don't have to follow streets, so we can virtually go anywhere and do almost anything that a patrol car can, and we can do it within seconds.
10-4, 44-311, 312 follow on 415 male at 691. Subject by the name of Bart. He's a male white. He started attacking the informant. Her son tried to stop him in Benny 242, the son.
But there are major problems with such low-level flying over urban areas. Helicopters are notoriously noisy, and the tail rotor can be a serious hazard if a landing has to be made in a crowded street. So the police here are trying out a new design. This is a NOTAR helicopter, short for no tail rotor. Instead, it uses a powerful internal fan, which drives air down through the tail boom to counteract the torque effect without using exposed rotor blades.
This area of the tail boom is where the fan is placed. The fan sucks in air through the vent up there, forcing air down through the tail boom. There are these grooves in the tail boom which help the anti-torque, which is what the tail boom is for. The air is then forced down through the tail section here and is allowed to exhaust out the back here. This is just clean ambient air that comes out here. It's very safe. You can put your hand or face up here. As this rotates, it forces the helicopter to turn, which the propellers on other helicopters would be doing.
The helicopter changes direction by rotating the tail nozzle opening, which Ron controls with the pedals, just like a conventional chopper. With no rotating blades at the rear of the helicopter, it's much safer to land in urban areas and much quieter. The helicopter has transformed policing in the cities and made them safer places to live. The helicopter is the only type of aircraft that has saved more lives than it has lost. And most of those lives have been saved at sea. The classic search and rescue helicopter is the Sea King. In an emergency, it is capable of floating on the water.
The aircraft is designed to work up to a maximum range of approximately 200 miles, and that depends primarily on the weather conditions, specifically the wind.
Be advised today, marking position of a leisure vessel having some difficulty.
So far this year, we've had 180 rescues. It can range from cliff fallers, which is probably one of the highest portion of our rescues, to children being blown out to sea.
0193, copy. Request the call sign of the aircraft marking position.
The rescue teams train constantly. On this mission, they will retrieve stranded pilots from the sea. The pilot must fly low. He positions the nose of the helicopter into the wind to gain as much extra lift from the rotor blades as possible. If either of the Sea King's two engines fails now, the chopper will drop into the sea.
We try and maintain a power margin for safety reasons. There are occasions, however, when you have to forego the luxury of a safety margin in order to effect the rescue quickly.
To rescue the stranded pilots, the diver attaches a line to the life raft. He steadies the line from below as the survivors are winched up. An automatic radar system holds the aircraft at constant height, while the pilot uses all his skill to maintain precise position over the raft. The rescue teams constantly put their own lives at risk to save others. They undergo rigorous training to save their own lives in impossible conditions. This helicopter crash simulator helps train the crews in the worst possible scenario, ditching at night in ice-cold waters with the chopper rolling over as it hits the water. In a real crash, the disoriented crew would have just seconds to escape alive. But the most extreme challenges faced by the Sea King crews are not out at sea, but along the coastline. Every year, hundreds of people become stranded on the high, jagged cliffs of the English coast. The crew begins each rescue with a careful survey of the cliffs around the victim. A cliff walker is stranded out of sight on the rocks below. This is a dangerous situation for the helicopter. The crew's first responsibility is to plan an escape route in case of engine failure.
Flag on top of the field? Yeah, we will do. We'll just move forward down if you're happy. Right, okay. Okay, our flyaway option is on the nose, directly to the field on top. Okay. We'll walk this side of those rocks, straight down to there. Right.
Next, the winch operator plans the route down.
The diver himself will have a chat. We'll talk about which route he's going to take down the cliff to get to the casualty, and then how we're going to recover the casualty.
From the authority aft, please.
During the actual rescue phase, the pilot hands over command to the winch operator, who has the best view down. He tells the pilot precisely where he needs the Sea King positioned.
very slight left, half left, 1 yard. Easy, steady, good position.
It takes tremendous skill. The pilot may have to fly as close as 2 feet from the cliff.
When you're hovering in the close vicinity of the cliff, the power that you require to hover invariably is quite high. The risk is updrafts and downdrafts, are large eddies and currents that are caused by the wind.
The winchman must keep the pressure on the wire constant during the descent. With 200 feet of wire played out, 1 inch of movement at the top could equate to 10 or 12 feet of movement at the bottom, which could swing the rescuer into the cliff face. With the victim safely on the wire, the pilot carefully maneuvers the helicopter away from the cliffs.
You could have 200 foot of wire out, so you don't want to raise the winch to get the casualty in the diver in at 200 feet. So what we do is the aircraft trickles forward at a few knots and starts descending whilst I'm raising the winch. And then we can keep them about 10 to 15 feet above the sea as the aircraft comes down to meet them. And we'll recover them into the aircraft about 30 feet.
Mission accomplished. But this crew has to be prepared to perform rescues in any conditions, at night, in fog, or in storm force winds. Even with the tremendous versatility of the Sea King, these crews risk their lives on every mission to save the lives of others.